like to call to order the May 7th meeting of the Wilmington Planning Commission. If I could ask you to, I don't need to, remove any non-military hats, please stand and join for the Pledge of Allegiance. I will make note that we are missing one commissioner who is stuck in traffic. He'll be here shortly. So, having said that, Mr. Attorney, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So let's move on. Planning Commission advises City Council on applications for rezoning, land development, code amendments, street closures, and long-range plans and policies. The Commission holds legislative hearings, meaning that anyone wishing to speak on a request may do so. The Commission issues a recommendation based on consistency of the request with the intent and purpose of the Land Development Code and consistency of a request with the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan and other relevant adopted plans and policies. All matters requiring Commission actions shall be presented to the Planning Commission by the planning staff and an applicant. In situations where the staff is the applicant, there will only be one presentation. In the case where there's two, staff will make the first presentation, the applicant will make the second. And both presentations are limited to 5 minutes unless the chair decides to extend those periods. Public hearing, the chair will open the public hearing to those physically present wishing to speak about an item. Those in favor of an item shall be heard first, followed by those opposed to an item. 10-minute time limit will be allowed for public comment in favor of an item, as well as 10 minutes for those opposed. Who is our timekeeper tonight? Ms. Painter, thank you. The chair, in their discretion, may extend time periods as warranted. All groups, organizations, neighborhoods, or similar associations desiring to comment are asked to appoint one spokesperson to present their concerns or point of view to the Commission on each agenda item. Public has been encouraged to submit their comments in writing via a web-based form located on the city's website. All comments received prior to 3 p.m. today are forwarded unedited to the Planning Commission. Amy, we've received nothing on anything. Okay, great. Now we are at full staff. All comments received will be delivered to City Council when I turn the page. When the item advances, all comments received will be made available to the public if interested. Voting, all votes will be voice votes after proper motions are made and consistency statements are read into the record. The chair will state the outcome of the vote and the action. Rezoning requests that receive an unfavorable recommendation from the Planning Commission may be appealed by the applicant to the Wilmington City Council. Appeals will be in the form of a letter submitted to the city clerk within 10 days of this hearing. Any item that is appealed will tentatively be heard by City Council at their June 17th meeting. Having said all that, let's move forward. First item of business is approval of the minutes from last meeting. I would ask the team to take a quick look real quick, and do I have a motion to approve or any amendment, any additions, deletions made?
So moved.
Okay. I have a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a first and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. Any procedural items and their timing in the meeting? I will just ask two things as we start through this meeting. If any agenda items tonight, if anybody feels they have any need to recuse themselves, please be forward with that now so we can plan accordingly. Seeing no one, let's move forward. Let's go to the old business. Actually, we're going to make an adjustment to the meeting. We have item number 3, which is the second item under new business. It is my understanding that we are looking at a request for a continuance, so instead of holding that to the end, I'll ask the applicant to come forward now so we can dispose of that and then move on.
Good evening. Amy Schaefer on behalf of the applicant. That's right, we are asking for a continuance for this matter. We don't have a date certain, so we would probably need to re-advertise. We're trying to work with staff on some other possible options for this area, and so that'll take a little bit of time. So we would just ask for a continuance.
Indefinitely?
Yes, sir. Hopefully not too long, but we don't want to set it for the next meeting and still not have everything we need.
Let me ask the staff one question. Patrick, that all it says then the risk to the city is just cost of the city is just putting up signs again?
Yes, sir. Staff would advertise as normal for the case.
Okay. Do I have a motion to accept applicant's request?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to accept the applicant's request for continuance.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Seeing none, deferred and continued indefinitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. Having said that, let's move then to old business, which is the Land Development Code Amendment, which is really a continuance from last meeting. And the mission is request to amend the City Code, Chapter 18, to eliminate special use permits and replace with conditional zoning. Brian Chambers is going to address the commission on this idea.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. This item was continued. The commission requested some additional information be provided from staff. Again, I'm just going to briefly review what we talked about last week, and then I'll go over those items that were requested. This amendment would replace special use permits with conditional zoning. It would eliminate special uses and special use permits in the code and allow these uses with a conditional zoning. These CZ uses will require a conditional district to be applied to the property, and they would require legislative hearings before Planning Commission and City Council. This is an overview of how the process would change between the special use permit and the conditional zoning. You can see on the right there would be an added step with the Planning Commission recommendation, and the City Council decision would be legislative instead of quasi-judicial. Staff is recommending approval of this. We believe it removes a barrier to public participation, allows for communication with elected officials, and simplifies the public hearing process. There will be no changes to the number of uses permitted or any of the prescribed conditions. These are the four things that the commission requested staff to bring back to you guys. Legality of the amendment, we did consult with the city attorney's office. This is not considered a downzoning, it's a process change. SUPs are allowed, but they are not required. You asked for some information on the background on Charlotte's move to SUPs and CZs. Their change occurred nearly 20 years ago. I couldn't get up with any staff that was there at that time. The most I can come up with is they did it for the same reasons that we're discussing here today. The other two items were review how the other local jurisdictions process SUPs, and then a summary of our use standards. Those both are included as attachments 1 and 2 in your packet, and I have those available to bring up this evening if it's needed as part of your discussion. With that, that's all staff has. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Does anyone have any questions of the applicant? No. Commissioner Lennon?
On page 16 of our package, the non-conforming use, change from non-conforming use to a different non-conforming use. Can you, that one troubled me a little bit. Can you just sort of walk through that?
I'm going to need to pull up that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
So I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
Brian, that's okay if you take the questions from there, because I have a sense we'll probably pull a couple of these exhibits up just to go through them for folks, sitting here and for folks that have dialed in on television.
Is this the provision?
Yes.
Well, it would replace the special use permit and require conditional zoning to be applied, and we removed the criteria because those are the criteria that would typically be applied if you're evaluating a special use permit.
So I guess my concern is if it was a non-conforming use, it didn't necessarily go through a special use permit. It's just like it existed prior to zoning?
Correct.
Possibly? Okay. I mean, I do see a risk for the property owner there. That was one. And then the other one was on page 13, post-decision actions. And can you, so those are the major changes, right? Highlighted in red?
Correct. So the code currently refers to the special use permit section when determining whether a major change to a site plan or what is considered a major change to a site plan. So since the proposal is to remove the special use permit section, we took those conditions and added them here so you would be using the same criteria.
Okay. And then I want to make sure I understand that little subparagraph B that says minor amendments shall be those not otherwise classified as major changes which are defined above, right?
Right. So if it doesn't qualify as a major, it would be a minor, and that could be approved administratively.
Okay. I guess that's where I'm going for my fellow commissioners up here. The last sentence, minor changes may be authorized by the city manager if required by engineering or other physical circumstances not foreseen at the time of approval.
Correct.
Okay. All right. That's all.
Anyone else? Okay. Seeing no other questions from the staff or from the commission to the staff, the applicant, at this point I'd like to open up the public hearing. And again, to go over the rules, we have, 10 minutes either way. And so we'll start with anyone that wants to speak in favor of the proposed amendment change. Again, anyone that wants to speak in favor of the proposed amendment change. Seeing no one, anyone here to speak in opposition to the proposed amendment change? Yes, sir, please come up and state your name.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Brad Schuler. I'm a resident of Castle Hayne. However, I do work here locally in Wilmington, and I'm a planner by trade, and I do have some concerns with this amendment. In my opinion, I don't believe that this amendment is compliant with the recent state law that prevents local governments from downzoning land. This amendment is much more than a process change, and really the process change that is part of this amendment is a byproduct of removing permitted special uses from the subject zoning districts. The state statutes state that downzoning includes when an ordinance results in a reduction of permitted uses than what was previously allowed by the code. And just for some background, the statutes state that a conventional zoning district, which is what is being impacted with this amendment, is a district in which a variety of uses are allowed as permitted uses or uses by right, and that may also include uses permitted only with a special use permit. As such, zoning ordinances will specifically identify which uses are permitted by special use permit within the provided conventional zoning districts that are provided within that code. And thus, these special use permits are generally appropriate in those districts in which they are permitted, provided, however, that they comply with the required SUP criteria. So for example, a property owner can't apply for an SUP for a heavy industrial use in the R15 zoning district because that use is not permitted as a special use in the R15 zoning district. In that case, however, the property owner can still seek a heavy industrial use by requesting to rezone their property to a district that allows that use. And really, that's when folks apply for rezonings, when they are seeking a land use that is not permitted under the district in which their land is currently zoned. A special use permit, as it is named, is a permit like any other zoning, and like any other, is a permit and like any other zoning permit. It does not change the zoning of the subject property. The statutes define special use permits as a permit issued to authorize the development or land uses in a particular zoning district. So when a property owner obtains a special use permit, they are strictly complying with the zoning regulations for that conventional zoning district in which they are zoned. It is also important to note that if a property owner decides, for whatever reason, they no longer want to move forward with their plans to develop under a special use permit, since that conventional district still applies to their land, they can pursue another development proposal as permitted under that zoning district. They are not tied to that SUP unless they are developing the use that is permitted under that permit. Eventually, like any other permit, the SUP will expire if the property owner does not start the work authorized by that permit. The same cannot be said for conditional zoning. Conditional zoning districts tie the property owner to the specific conditions and site plan that was approved as part of that conditional zoning district. And removing a conditional zoning district requires action by city council to rezone the property to another district. Also under conditional zoning, while the property owner may gain the land use they are seeking with that rezoning, it is important to note that they lose any future by right use of their land. So for example, under this amendment, say a property owner had a conditional R15 district which was approved for a community center. If they decide that project's no longer feasible and they just want to build single-family housing as permitted in the conventional R15 district, they would have to rezone their property, as they would again be subject to the conditions and site plan approved with the conditional zoning district. So I just want to simply put, if a property owner must rezone their property in order to develop a certain use, then that use is not permitted in the existing zoning district. And if you reduce the number of permitted uses, then to me, as the statute states, that constitutes a downzoning. And I do want to note that the definition of rezoning in the statutes does include the application of an overlay district or a conditional zoning district. So again, going from an R15 general district to a conditional R15 district is a rezoning. I do note and understand that there is frustration with the SUP process, but I do still think they're an appropriate tool. I think one of the issues is that we tend to forget that special uses are generally appropriate in the district in which they are permitted, provided, again, they comply with the required findings of fact. The SUP process also requires the applicant at their own cost to provide expert testimony relating to the impacts of the proposed development. And I understand there are concerns about what can be considered during an SUP process, but at the end of the day, the decision must be made on facts and not fears or unknowns. And to me, that's a decision that should be promoted in the city. I also do not agree with requiring certain uses to go through the conditional zoning process. Conditional zoning is a voluntary type of district. It should be the option of the property owner to seek. So when a local government requires a certain land use obtain a conditional zoning, it takes away that voluntary component. Zoning regulation should be clear. The property owner should know what they need to provide in order to receive a zoning permit. And requiring uses to essentially be permitted via conditional zoning takes that clarity away, as there's a lot of discretion provided to the council with the legislative decision. Really, legislative actions on how land should be developed should be made via the creation of zoning regulations for that district and not through a required rezoning process. And while this amendment seeks to allow for more consideration of the public interest, I think it's important to note that the public is everybody in the city. and not just a select few that live near a proposed development. We seem to forget sometimes about the amount and variety of public input that was taken into consideration with the comprehensive plan. We typically never receive that level of input at a rezoning hearing, and unfortunately, I feel that rezoning hearings often focus on perceived negatives of development and not the good that comes from development. I do want to end on just some suggestions to consider as alternatives. I'm not saying these are the best suggestions, but I think we can look at reducing SUPs by making them by right uses subject to additional use-specific standards. Some of the special uses currently permitted in the city, like assisted living residents, provide an important services to certain individuals, but they also may receive a lot of opposition through a rezoning process and thus hurt their chances of being approved. And lastly, I think we should consider the possibility of making the Board of Adjustment the decision-making body for special use permits. I think part of the frustration about this process is that City Council is a legislative body and they act in a legislative capacity for every other decision they make. And they're accustomed to considering folks' opinions, and residents are accustomed to sharing their concerns. So I get it, it must be frustrating for council to be told, you know, you can't talk to these folks and you can't consider these opinions. The Board of Adjustment's already set up as a quasi-judicial board. They're not tasked with changing the law or creating new law. They are there just to strictly interpret and apply the code. And with that, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, I'd just
Yes.
like to recognize our city attorney is here this evening and is available for questions or questions regarding the legality of the downzoning legislation. Thank you.
I got that. Excuse me. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition? Okay, seeing no one, then I'm going to close the public hearing. At this point, we always give the applicant the opportunity to come back and address any points that were made in a plus and minus, so that's probably a good time for a city attorney to represent the city, because there were some points made about downzoning and
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you'd like from a staff perspective and from my perspective as far as the downzoning. I have spoken, and Mike has spoken to individuals at the School of Government. We've done our own legal research. We do not believe that this is downzoning. I very much respect Mr. Schuler's opinion on that, but this is a process change, in our opinion and in the opinion of the School of Government and the other places that we have checked with. Property owners still have the ability to do everything that they wanted to do with their property. We're not taking away anything from them. We're just changing the mechanism that they need to go through to get it. They all still have the ability to come to this body. They have the ability then to go to City Council. They have the ability then, if they don't like the decision, to go to Superior Court. They have all of those mechanisms that are still going to be in place. It's just a different title and procedure for for how they go through that. And just for some background information, the reason for staff's request for this arose out of the last SUP hearing that City Council did. It's not necessarily a matter of, inconvenience, but I mean, the meeting that they were in, these do take a lot longer than regular meetings. You're all aware of that. It was a 4-hour meeting. City Council was there till almost midnight, and the questions that came about were, why are we doing this in this manner? Because we're coming up with the same thing that we do at a regular hearing. We're just introducing all of these legalistic, quasi-judicial factors into it, and we're winding up with the same result. And so their questions from multiple council members to me specifically was, why are we doing this? Do other communities do this? Are people still using SUPs? Are they using something different? My office went and researched that. We determined that there are many places who don't use SUPs at all. SUPs are a tool that municipalities have to use in their toolbox, but they're never required. There is no instance that an SUP is required by statute. It's just something that a lot of municipalities, especially a long time ago when different codes were initially developed, as far as zoning goes, that they decided to use them as a specific mechanism, but many municipalities are determining that they've served their purpose and that they're wanting more public involvement and more transparency in local government, and the SUP and the quasi-judicial hearings are just more onerous for that. The individuals who are in the community, they don't know what they're required to do at a quasi-judicial hearing. They don't know what experts they're required to bring with them. They don't even know that they're required to bring experts with them. They don't know what to say. It's just very confusing for everyone who's involved, and it discourages a lot of public input to that extent. And it's built that way. The SUP hearing is a quasi-judicial, so that's what it's designed for. But I think that the impetus for this is that that's not a necessary thing for most of the things in our code. We get approximately one SUP that comes through a year, so it's not like this is a regular occurrence that's happening every month at City Council, and it just does not seem that it is it's really a necessary tool that we need to use anymore, and it does create a lot of issues every time it does come up. And so we asked staff to look into drafting this amendment. We worked with Brian and planning and Linda, and this is what they came up with. And so I'd be glad to answer any of your questions, but I do not believe that this is a downzoning because property owners are going to have the right to do everything that they could have done previously with their property. It's not prohibiting them from any type of particular use any more than an SUP would. You're still going through the same analysis. You're still having to make findings that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and with all of the plans for Wilmington. And so I think that in general, we just feel that from the staff's perspective and from the interest of efficiency for both our boards and for City Council, that this is the appropriate way to go at this time. It has been brought up on multiple different occasions over the 12, 13 years that I've been here. The planning directors prior to Ms. Painter didn't really entertain it at that point, didn't believe it was the appropriate time, but other municipalities are moving in that direction. Some don't use SUPs at all anymore, like Charlotte, and I don't think Leland either. I think there's some other examples in your packet that you were given, and we just believe it's the right time for Wilmington to move in that direction as well. Be glad to take your questions.
Do I have any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Kofer.
Yes, thank you. One question that we spoke about at the last meeting involves some of the things that came up from the opposition would be what runs with the land now? So if I have a special use permit today, you know, how does that follow my land? Or does that follow my business entity or my building or what have you? And with conditional zoning, what would follow the land in this case?
So with a special use permit, it follows the use. And meaning that once you get a special use permit, so long as that use continues, even if the owners change on that property, as long as the business continues to be used in that manner, the permit will continue. But the owner has the option in that case to let, even if they have gotten an SUP, they have the right to let that SUP lapse, just like they would have a right to rezone property if they wanted to do a different use. So either way, they've got an option as to pick up and do a different use on their property. It's just a different mechanism of going through it. They can let their SUP permit lapse if they don't want to do that and make a different use of it, or they can apply for another rezoning. Either way, there's a mechanism for them to go through, and the government is not imposing a particular use on them. It's voluntary what they come to us with, and if they want to voluntarily change it at any time in the future, they're free to do that.
Okay.
Does that help?
It does. And a follow-up question to that would be, so with an SUP as it stands today, there'd be a time lapse and perhaps the permit just expires and then we come and apply for a different use. And perhaps the different use we're applying for it can be administratively approved or through staff level. We don't need to go through this process because it's conditional or it's permitted or whatnot. With the CZ, and we have an approved use, special use under this conditional zoning, I guess that's the part I'm missing. So would the time lapse it just kind of vanishes, it goes away because we've abandoned that use, or would change require this proposed process again to come to staff through planning, through council?
Most of the SUPs that we have, most of the permits that we currently have in place have something in them that indicates that if the property is not used for that use for a particular amount of time, that the permit automatically lapses. And so just letting it go and not using it or changing it to a different use that's allowed and not using it for the SUP use for a certain period of time is usually an automatic thing with the SUP. If a property owner came before you and got, one zoning because they wanted to do something there, and then we had some economic issue come up, which I'm sure we can all imagine, where they weren't allowed to do that project or weren't able to do that project, didn't pencil after 18 months to 2 years, they weren't able to get it off the ground, they still have the ability to come back and ask for a different use and a different rezoning at that point if it's not allowed in whatever they rezoned it to.
And I think it came from the first meeting where I'm looking at this, really, this exercise through the eyes of a business owner. I don't own the land. Let's just say like the anecdote I used last time, I go to Commissioner Lennon, he owns a piece of property and I want to open a business there. And he says, sure, Ace, go for it, I'll rent you the land, I'm the landlord. And then I get this particular use and then, something happens to me. I'm thinking specifically of the Serpentarium downtown. The person no longer is with us, I don't even think. And that was a really contested, controversial piece. And it would have probably fallen on this because it probably goes under zoo, which is one of the few uncommon ones we would have. So if I go and get the Serpentarium through conditional zoning and something happens to me, does Mr. Lennon, who owns this property under conditional zoning, how does it go away for him? Is my
If
question.
it's zoned differently,
Well, through the new proposed process, it would be, special use would go through conditional zoning, so I would get, right?
it's no longer even called special use, it would all be conditional zoning, so it'd
Right,
all
so
be,
that we would be conditional zoned for my zoo on this property.
yes.
Is there a trigger for it to just,
There's not a trigger for that to just disappear, but there's nothing, I don't believe, and I'm getting a little bit out of my depth here, and so the planning folks can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that there's anything to stop us from giving a conditional permit that contains multiple uses. And I believe that we have done that before, to say that you can use it for a school or a something else or a something else. And so when you come before anybody for any of these bodies for permission, you don't have to specifically say it's going to be this, or this. You can say, I've got 5 different things that I'm rolling around in my head, and you can get a permit approved for any of those. And then any of those would still stand afterwards. If that's not what you wanted to do, then you could come back and get another.
let me ask you another question, because I'll be way out of my depth when I ask it, but it's a question. Can you inject some language into this that says, if the use is abandoned or not continued for a period of 12 months, my Serpentarium, I've shut down, I'm not in use, then it reverts back to whatever it was before. I feel like that's what SUP is now. It would eventually, a discontinuance would revert back, right?
I don't see any reason why we can't do that, and I don't I believe that we have done that.
Let's let Brian clarify.
A couple things. If you rezoned it or added the conditional district to the zoning category, you could get that CZ for that use, but you could also leave it wide open for every other by right use to occur as well. You can structure the CZ any way you'd like. As far as letting it fall off after a period of time, I believe, and we would have to look into it, but I believe you can structure the code any way you'd like, and you can say that, you rezone this property, and we have something in the code now that says if you don't act on it in 3 years, then the commission can suggest city council remove the CD. So you could put a similar mechanism on this, just like this SUP saying it reverts back to the previous zoning without the conditional district.
But that was one thing that I wanted to correct, is that, and I believe, and I think this is what you were saying as well, Brian, is that you can structure it so that you still have the ability to do all of the by right things. You're just adding the conditional zoning to that list.
That's a piece that,
Yes.
for me personally, I'm learning on the job here, did not understand. So we go through conditional rezonings frequently. We overlay now this plan that didn't fit the by right, but that particular property owner still has all those by right options.
It can be set up that way.
If that's what they wanted to do, you can structure that district any way you'd like.
But today, like for agenda item number 2, which is R15, trying to go asking for MD 17, if MD 17 is granted, do they still have all the R15 latitude?
They're rezoning to a new district. This would be applying a conditional district to an existing zoning. So the underlying zoning would not be changing. It would
Okay,
be-
so there's the root of it. The underlying zoning does not change. So I'm confusing myself asking these questions. I'm not sure I get it.
No, you're
Mr.
doing
Chair.
good. You're doing good.
I thought it might be helpful to give a more, in my opinion, maybe a more relevant, if the zoning is MD 17, I'm looking at the screen, and I want to put a building footprint up to 5,000 square feet. Previously, I would do that with an SUP. Now I would come in with a CZ request for that building. Something happens, and on the one hand, I've got my MD 17 plan, and on the other hand, I've got my MD 17 plus my CZ plan to include the 5,000 square foot building. For whatever reason, the 5,000 square foot building goes away, but I've gone through the process to obtain that CZ. Do I have to come back and do something?
No, I don't.
Or can I just implement my MD 17?
If you're just dropping what you got, the conditional
So I
zoning.
don't have to call Brian and say, hey, I need to tell you I'm not doing this plan, I'm going to stick with my MD 17 plan. Because that's, please correct me if I'm wrong, but under current CZ, as I understand it, and I'm talking about straight rezone to a CZ, that's not the case, right?
Right. Typically, you'll see a conditional district with a new zoning district. So you're looking at a new plan for a new district, and that's going to be the use that's going to be approved. In this case, you would have an R15 or an MD17, and you want to develop that property, and you need a special use permit currently or a CZ for a building up to 5,000 square feet. If you didn't want to build that 5,000 square foot building and want to do something else in the MD17, you could build by right, so as long as we structure the CZ that way.
And you can do that right now, but.
You can leave it general. You can say MD17 CD for this use, and then every other by right use. So if you don't want to do that, you would just go back to whatever's by right in the MD17.
I'm sorry, can I interject real quick?
Yes,
Because I think there's an important difference between what you're asking and what Brian's responding to. From what I heard you say, you've got MD17, and then you ask for a CZ for an additional building. And if you decide you're not going to do that additional building, but you don't indicate that you want to do something different, you just don't want to do that building, you don't have to come back. If you want to do something different than the building you got approved, you would have to come back.
I like her answer better than yours, Brian.
Because with yours, you're just not following through on the additional.
And that was
Building.
kind of what I was getting at, because, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding now, as was stated earlier, an SUP is a permit. If you elect not to exercise that permit, you still have that underlying MD17 zoning. I can come to TRC with a plan and not have to go through all of.
But with the example you just gave, you could not build it now, but come back in 2 or 3 years and build it, and you're still good. Do you see what I'm saying? And with
Yes.
the SUP, that would have lapsed.
It would have lapsed.
And so you actually have more time under, it doesn't go away, so you can come back to what you wanted to do at any point later, as opposed to only having a year to.
I mean, just a comment for the future conversation, the reason I liked your answer better is because I don't like the idea, if this goes forward, that you have to structure the CZ in such a way to protect your underlying zoning. That's what I was getting at, so.
Right.
And I think my question with yours is a CZ typically has a site plan assigned to it. And if there is a significant change to the site plan outside of that major list, you do have to come back and ask not to do it or to change it.
If there is a change, and the
If you
difference
ta-
is
if
if
you
you just
take-
decide not to do it, you don't.
If you
you don't
take
have
the
to.
building off and you build everything else and you don't build that one building and it gets to inspections and you're looking at COs, then the inspectors are saying your building's not on there. Where's your building? You're going to end up coming back. That's, I think, my crux of why I don't like the CZ zoning applied in this manner. because it is always it's for a specific plan of some sort. I like what Mr. Schuler said, and maybe it's the simple answer. Maybe that's the thing to do is, can the Board of Adjustment, if we only have one a year, I would put it at the Board of Adjustment. They're already doing quasi-judicial hearings. They're set up to do that now. No, I don't want to sit through, nor do the folks here, a 4-hour meeting. I understand that for once a year. But I still think SUPs have a place. I mean, the ones that I've heard in the past are, before they were taken away completely to hear them, was a lady that wanted to have a daycare in her home, and she had to build parking spaces. They had to come before us, get a special use permit in residential area to get 4 parking spaces or whatever it was put in. So now if you're forcing them to go through a CZ zoning, there's 3 other steps now that they've got to go through. They didn't have to before, and it was not a 4-hour meeting. Understanding the case we're just referring to was a different case. But there are those small little things, or if you come into used to, now height's taken care of, but we used to come in and look for, if you wanted an additional height, you used a special use permit for that issue. If the height goes away, the special use permit, I think the special use permit has a mechanism to disappear if you don't use it. Or if you don't build it, it goes away. So the next person that uses the land, they don't automatically get to keep it unless they're going to maintain the same use, as you were saying. With the conditional district zoning, that has a plan side to it. If you sell it to the next guy, he's got to go with the same plan. He can't, unless he just wants to start the whole thing over again. I think that's my underlying issue with it. It's not that the process is where I'm getting tied up, and whether it becomes a site plan that we've got a lot of unintended consequences we don't have today with it, that I think this could encourage. What was the number of special uses that we had in the code, Brian? Was it is
22.
it a 22?
22.
That would need a special use permit? And granted, it sounds easy enough to put it into a conditional zoning, and obviously you can do that, no doubt in my mind. But some of these are, I just think if that is the case, they're already held to a higher level, a higher standard. They have a very specific criteria that they have to meet. I understand the part about it's quasi-judicial and you can't talk to somebody ahead of time. I mean, that's kind of the facts of that particular case. But
If I could just interject real quick,
Sure.
though, I don't think it's really the matter so much of not being able to talk to anybody ahead of time. It's the fact that the way that the hearings are structured, they prevent public input for the most part.
They prevent general public input over someone from 10 miles away coming because they don't like it, talking about it. They make you have standing is the difference in the matter, correct?
It is correct that you're required to have standing, but for instance, in the hearing that we just had, there were people who were just at the other end of the block that were determined to not have standing, who certainly are going to be impacted by those things.
Sure.
And those individuals were not allowed to speak. But even the ones who did have standing, the issue at that point is the general public does not know that you can only talk about traffic and noise and the certain specific things that go along with it. They're really handicapped and kept out of those hearings for the most part.
And
so
I
even the
concur.
ones who are able to speak don't know the parameters that they have. They don't know that they've got to have experts. They don't have the funds to get those experts in. And so even the ones who do have standing are handicapped in those situations, and it becomes very cumbersome and defeating for them and difficult for the boards as well. And so I think that's really what's behind this. It's not, I mean, obviously you like to get as much information as you can ahead of time, but if it's possible, and so that is one thing, but that's not what's driving this. It's the frustration of the communities, not from the people 10 miles away, but from even those communities that are directly around these places.
And I respect what you're saying, and I agree with that. And in the situation that you're talking about, the folks at the end of the block, yes, I think they do have a reasonable, they should be able to speak. I agree. So that situation should have been in a conditional zoning. It was denied that. They tried, in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, it was suggested or brought forth to try to go around something that they had already asked for and gotten denied for. So to me, that one is, we got to push that one over here
Well,
and leave it.
let's-
We are typically not, just a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
We are typically not looking at things like that. That's not the normal once-a-year kind of case that we get. That's why I say Board of Adjustment, that's the right place for it to go. I mean, I think we're adding more layers on top of the same folks that you're talking about. They can't afford the experts and the others by putting it in conditional zoning. That's my thought. Sorry.
Let me jump in. Having chaired both entities, Board of Adjustment and now this, I would respectfully disagree that I don't think Board of Adjustment should be involved in any type of, I'll call these zoning decisions. I mean, they're there to deal with exceptions to the current code, and they do that quite well. All right, and I understand the need at that point to have quasi-judicial governance around those discussions. You can get into a lot of, I guess I have a couple reactions. One is, and Brian, this is to you, okay? Let me just do it this way. When I look at the proposal, are we taking anything away from an applicant's ability to move down the path from a process standpoint to get to where they want to get to, which is, I'm looking to get to a specific zone, I'm looking to get to a specific configuration, call it a use, call it whatever you want to call it. Are we taking anything away by recommending this proposal to council?
It's our opinion that we're just changing the process. They can still apply for the uses that they're seeking.
Okay. I'm going to go to the right. Commissioner Lennon.
I think it's obvious not everybody agrees with that, but respects it. But is there any other municipality or local government that has, other than New Hanover County, who I think it's working its way through now, is there anybody else who's tested your, I'm not saying you, but the city's legal position on that this doesn't violate state statute?
I don't think that the downzoning provisions have been in effect long enough for that, which is why we just spoke with, my office just spoke with the Institute of Government, and they basically said the same thing, is that, nobody has really tested it since then, but he's also not heard of, he also wasn't aware of any reason that understanding that people who are opposed have the same opinion that Mr. Schuler does, and that several, attorneys and other individuals have had and expressed, and I acknowledge that, and I do see where they're coming from. But just my legal analysis is that it does not, that the process changes of allowing you all the same uses, but just changing the way that you get to them and eliminating the SUP, it's actually giving the property owners more ability and more freedom to do what they want, as opposed to restricting them more.
So how long, and I think we have 10 minutes aside here for public hearing, is that right? 10 minutes
Yeah.
pro and con?
Or
How much
I
does
get-
council allot?
30.
During public hearing,
30.
yes, it's
30
well,
each or 30
I
total?
don't know that they don't really have a,
I think he said, I think the mayor kind of sets a parameter going in, but I've
Correct.
very rarely seen that adhered to.
everybody has 3 minutes to speak at the moment, I believe. But we have a public comment section at council, and then also a public hearing. And generally speaking, as long as it's not duplicative and doesn't, ramble and go on and on, the mayor has the discretion to allow them to speak.
So what we're really, the longest one in your 13 years, an hour, 2 hours? I'm not talking about a SUP, I'm talking about public comment on a project.
Oh, for public hearings? Oh, no, it's not unusual that they last at least, that they last an hour.
The public comment section.
There's public comment at the beginning, then there's public hearing. Which one are you talking about?
Public hearing, thank you.
Okay, the public hearings can take an hour, potentially more, but depending on, making sure that they're not repetitive and things like that. The issues with most of the quasi-judicial hearings for the SUP is that it's not really the comment period that's taking up the most time. It's the frustration with having to tell everybody what they can and can't do. Everybody that came up that wanted to speak, we basically had to do a voir dire, which is a question and answer period with them, and then they had to make a determination, do they or don't they have standing, and then it took 30 minutes for each witness to go through that process.
And unless I can only speak to the year that I ran the Board of Adjustment, but it was, if somebody had a desire to speak, all they had to do was raise their hand and be sworn in by the attorney, present at the time, and they were sworn in as an expert witness. Now, it then becomes up to the Board of Adjustment, or in this case, it would, this proposition would purport that it becomes up to the Planning Commission to ultimately decide what is opinion, what is fact, and, that's, I just, shifting something like this to Board of Adjustment, I don't think changes the concern.
But, so along those lines, if I may, I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
the conditions that are arrived at outside of the SUP process are largely based on the code, but can also be based on purely subjective. I've seen it happen here before, right? We want it to be 10 feet shorter, or we want blue shutters instead of red. In an SUP, all of those factors are based on the code and the findings of fact, those conditions, if you will, right? So where are the guardrails, to use Commissioner Adams' line, where are the guardrails on the purely emotional-driven conditions that could be placed on an applicant?
Well, so the council has to make sure that the applicant has to agree to the conditions, which I think is your guardrails. So if you're making some sort of bizarre request for, a business to only be open between the hours of 10 and 2 in the afternoon or something like that, City Council says, hey, yeah, that'd be a great idea. The applicant says, no, we're not going to do that. We've got to be open from like 9 to 5. Then I think that those are your guardrails. But if somebody comes up and says, hey, the lights from these tennis courts are blaring directly into my house, and the suggestion is made, could you use downlighting instead of uplighting, and the applicant says, yeah, we don't care, we could do that, then that's a condition that you would add. And so I think that there are guardrails in place. They've got to be reasonable conditions, and they've got to be conditions that the applicant accepts. But they can still be based on the concerns that the community members and other people that are around them are bringing up for noise, for light, sound, whatever it is, traffic.
But they could be conditions that otherwise wouldn't work their way into an SUP process.
A lot of times you've got those same conditions that do work their way into an SUP process. You've got
Agreed, but hypothetically, and this is a question, not a statement, there could be conditions in this proposed process that could not be required under the SUP process.
There's not something, I'm not aware of a situation that something couldn't be required, because anything in an SUP process, the staff's going to make recommendations, and a lot of times they're going to come up with those conditions themselves and impose them and request them. So I'm not quite sure of anything that's prevented from being included in there.
But have you not seen instances, and I know your time is more with council, but have you not seen instances where council has imposed a condition as part of the approval from this dais that wasn't previously there?
Sure, but only if the applicant agrees. And if they don't have their client there, what I see most of the time is either their client's there and they may come back and say, yes, we're fine, let me go talk to my client for a second, or they come back and say, we'll have to think about that and see how that pencils out. Can we have a continuance to the next meeting, or something to that effect? But they don't ever force them to agree to conditions from the dais that they wouldn't otherwise agree to they give them the opportunity to continue it, to talk with their client, to whatever. So I've never seen them dictate from the dais.
I'll respectfully look at it a different way, but.
And I'm sure that the attorneys in the room would also see it a different way that have been in front of council, but they don't see it that way.
Dictates
I
maybe
can
a
tell you.
strong word, but imply might be another one, so, thank you.
Request to consider, maybe.
Yeah, something you said earlier about this coming from the 4-hour meeting. I watched it. It was painful. It could have been 2 hours.
It was very painful.
I don't think that we should make a decision based on changing something that's there based on an, I'll say inconvenience, but spending longer on a project because of one time, where they're not having to hear them. To me, I like the factual basis of it, because we've all been in these meetings where somebody will get up and say, I've already got water on my property. This being built here is going to increase the water on my property. Well, you don't have any stormwater regulations imposed in your property. That's what the engineers are here to do. I don't see a negative with the special use permit. I don't have a problem with it. I am for it, and that's just how I feel. Sorry.
Sure. No, you don't have to apologize to me. I'm just trying to, and like I said at the beginning,
That's how I felt last month.
No, and like I said from the beginning, I really, truly do not think it's an inconvenience matter so much as it is the responses that came out of that meeting, especially from the public, were extremely negative, and they felt like they were being cut out. And I think that has more of an impact than anything. And so, and understanding what you're saying too, that there is a place for expert testimony, but you also have that in a conditional district rezoning. The applicant's always going to bring their engineers. Staff has already had their engineers and staff look at it too and can comment on those things. So I don't feel like you're cutting those things out. It's the process itself that made it so painful. And I think that's what they're looking at. And given that SUPs are not a requirement to use anywhere, it's not just that meeting that sparked things like that's why I tried to make a point to say this has been brought up multiple times over the last decade or so, and it just was not seen as the right time to do that. But now that more municipalities are going that direction, it just seems like this is a more appropriate time for the city to move in that direction. And this board has the ability to recommend or not recommend it. It's just that's where it came from, because city council members of city council expressed concern and wanted to see something that could possibly address those issues for transparency's sake.
And we're not an elected body.
Sure, of
And
course.
so I get that community input is important, but to me, to a certain extent, and that's when the factual basis comes in, because there's just that not in my backyard, whatever it's going to be. And I think when you bring in the factual side of it, that is helpful in some instances, and I don't think it's been overused based on what I'm hearing from you guys. But anyway, that's
Yes, ma'am.
standing.
Appreciated.
Okay, let's go down this side. Commissioner Kofer again.
Thank you. Ms. Everhart, while you're still here with us, couple things. One, I think if everybody in the room keeps their perspective that we're talking about 22 uses that are on that screen, right? Of those uses, I don't believe any of them are taking housing into consideration. And the two that I can quickly read that do include housing are related to historic districts.
I think we agreed when we sent the staff back after the last meeting that this really was not about the 9 that apply to the historic district. We're really talking about the 13 that.
So then when we're talking about, again, just because a lot of the discussion so far has been about R15 to MD17, people in the room regarding zoning and density and things of that nature, that's not part of this discussion tonight, right? What we generally do is a CD, a conditional district rezoning, a C as in Charlie, a D as in David. That doesn't change. That process is legislative, and it's going to stay legislative as far as I understand. It's not going back to quasi-judicial period. So what we're really talking about is these 22 items that when we reduce the historic district pieces, we're talking about taking that from quasi-judicial to legislative. Okay.
Yes, sir.
The mechanism to do that, one, could be to go to the Board of Adjustment. But that doesn't seem to remedy the concern that council has about getting away from quasi-judicial altogether and going to legislative. again, for
If it
these
went to
items?
BOA, then their appeal is directly to
Superior Court.
Superior Court.
Okay.
And so it would take it away from council. But like I said, I don't feel like council is trying to divest themselves of their responsibility. I think they're just trying to increase public participation.
Okay. So, one thing I'm seeing is when we look at, which a great job by staff for collecting all these models in not just our local community, but beyond, is that New Hanover County has a mechanism to keep it quasi-judicial, but still come through the planning staff, planning commission, which gives the vetting process we talked about, but it still keeps it quasi-judicial, so it doesn't change the root of the matter here. The SUP as it stands today, we're trying to simply take that and give it another mechanism through. The mechanics is, one of my questions would be, how can we create what we have today through an expiration so that my serpentarium leaves my landlord's land when I no longer am the owner-operator of it? I feel like that's fair for the landlord more than anyone, and the tenant, and I don't see how we get the expiration. So when I'm looking at this critical flow of thought here, what is the premise? What are the definitions? What's the definition of CZ, Charlie Zebra, versus the definition of CD, Charlie David? The acronyms are getting confused. We're talking about, we're kind of debating conditional districts when we're actually talking about conditional zoning. Are they one and the same? Is the city going to have two different definitions?
They are one and the same. The CZ is used to indicate the process by which the use will be allowed in the table of permitted uses.
Okay, so then that's the playing field.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, and the process that you're talking about is no different than, so you own a zoo, and somebody wants to buy your property. They've got the same option. They know coming in what it's zoned for, and they have the option to rezone it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's,
I think that's where the rubber meets the road just for me. I mean, just candidly, I would be in support of it. I think, as some of the other commissioners say, it should go up to council. This was their request. But I think that, with a lot of policies, devil's in the details. And in this particular one, it's just a simple expiration for me. It's right now with an SUP. I think it would expire with discontinuance of use. With conditional zoning, it wouldn't.
if that's what the property owner wants, then we can always
But you have to
incorporate that.
bifurcate property owner versus business owner, because these are uses. So, like a spa and a health club and a zoo and a commercial parking, a little different. I mean, one of our speakers tonight came in front of us for commercial parking and actually went through the conditional district rezoning process near the college recently. That was in the last year. And she did not go through the SUP process, which it appears here on this table could have happened. But a lot of this to me seems like it's less about the property owner building something that's going to be habitable and, apartments or houses. This is more about business owner, and therein lies my problem, because those can be two different autonomous individuals. I can have a business on someone else's property. And that's where I think I'm just struggling with the SUP. It does expire. The CD just doesn't have an expiration. Figure out a way to get an expiration, and I'm on board.
So I'm slightly confused, because the business owner are you saying the business owner would have gotten an SUP without the property owner's?
Consent, yes. You would need the property owner's consent.
No, you
I would
can't,
think.
you can't do that.
You can't
No.
do that.
No.
Okay.
In fact, it's got to be the property owner who fills out the application. And so
Okay.
if you're a business owner and you want to put a zoo there, then you've got the property owner. We've got a situation like that right now with somebody who owns a car business. And so, but the problem is he can't get the property owner to come in and fill out the application so he can come into compliance. And so, you can't do that. So I'm sorry, that's where I was confused. You can't do what you're talking about. There's not going to be, when I say property owner, that's the only person that can come in and get either of these at this point.
So, but with the SUP, if the property owner does come in and agrees, at some point, with the car lot or the car business, at some point, if that particular tenant, business owner, abandons use, it expires.
If it ceases to be used as a car lot.
Right. That's the only thing we're missing, in my opinion, with CZ.
And that can always be included, but a lot of times with a conditional district, the property owners don't want it to expire. They're wanting it to change permanently. And so, but if that's something that the property owner, wants, but if you go to the trouble to do the rezoning, you want it to be effective forever. With the SUP, it was actually more of a hindrance, and it was putting more responsibility on the property owner to get things done within that year, or else it was a use it or lose it kind of thing. So really, the SUPs are, in that sense, a more onerous use on the property owner. Once you get your rezoning, your conditional district rezoning, you got it, unless you want to change it. And so in that sense, but certainly if the property owner did want to say, I want this to terminate at some point, but I've not seen that happen ever.
Right. Well, that would be that's I think, beyond those comments, and I know that we're going to close the public hearing and go into deliberation, but we're already in deliberation. So, one thing to correct myself from speaking before, when I was at Wrightsville Beach, Pat's rolling his eyes because he always does, for about a decade, we did use CUPs, conditional use permits, and they were quasi-judicial. Since I left, I looked at the chart and was shocked to see that they've gone to special use permits. Called down there, and yeah, sure enough, right after I left, they went to special use permits. And they're getting ready to actually go to conditional zoning because of the changes to 160D. Is that the general statute section?
That's the land
Okay.
development. Yeah.
So it looks like, that could be a trend. Oak Island's done it. Curie's taken that change too. And Commissioner Lynn and I, outside of, I mentioned some of these municipalities are extremely prescriptive and on anything you do with regards to staff and at the admin level does not get the right to approve. You're coming in front of council for just about anything. You want to put a picnic table outside your building, go see the council. So Wilmington actually in that regard is quite libertarian in use, the use table that you were looking at. And that's just a comment to correct myself from the last meeting when I was talking about the CUPs. They no longer were doing them, but I think that's it for me.
Commissioner Lennon.
I'm curious, I always wonder why. So with the people who have degrees in education and planning and law, what was the genesis of the special use permit process? Where did it come from and why did it exist? And I'm trying to figure out what's changed. Brian, how long have you been here?
20 years.
20 years. And so the SUP's been in place for that 20 years?
It has been during that time, yes.
Okay. So I'm curious why it was put into place originally, and then that would lead to what we can talk about, which is why does it have to change? But I'm curious, what were the origins of it from a legal and from a planning perspective? Why was it even written into the code? The multiple versions of the code, sorry.
Specifically in Wilmington?
Sure.
Or just in general?
Sure.
Because I can't really say because I wasn't here 20 years ago, but go ahead.
I think, when my presentation at the last meeting it was put in the code to allow uses that need additional oversight because they could have specific impacts to the area. And they came into place at a time before CD zoning was even an option. CD zoning evolved over time, and this is where we're at as an additional option to allow those uses. So if CD zoning was something that was available back when we instituted SUPs, you very well could have just had that option.
Just a couple comments. I see this boils down to really two things. One is, I personally believe this is a process discussion, or should be, my opinion. All right, and we're talking about the ability to, as we look at this chart, we're talking about the ability to do these things just in a different process. I have not heard last month or now, or any discussions I've had, with anybody, that there's a takeaway of the ability to do something. So that's one point. Number two, And this one probably is as equal, if not more important to me, and it's around the discussion, it's around the topic of people's ability to participate in the process. And what we have witnessed, God, in my 3 years here, and as when I sat on the Board of Adjustment, is in the Board of Adjustment process, if you want to be sworn in to speak under oath, you have that right to do that. You just come right in, raise your hand, and whatever, and do that. And that's fine. What I've heard, though, in the discussions leading up to this recommendation is, yeah, but wait a minute, but that could still be just opinion and whatever. And I'm just a little sensitive to an applicant can come up with his or her expert people, and whether we're sitting in a quasi-judicial or sitting in a legislative process. I mean, I can't imagine, I'm sitting here tonight, I'm looking at, we have an applicant sitting out there that has their experts, all right? And every right to do that. And I don't see that, if we take this recommendation and recommend it to council, I don't see that being any different. I really don't, okay? And it's up to this group, as an example, that's sitting here, just like it's up to council to decide whether, a paid expert or whomever has more standing in a discussion than someone who is not a paid expert. And that's our process. That's our form of government. And I just, I do bristle when, the objection to this is around, yeah, but those people don't have the professional expertise. I really, that has been used with me, and I do bristle with that a little bit. So it's just one person's opinion. And it's, anyone else have any point they want to make, or?
I think
Commissioner Collier.
my only point is, I do agree that the public needs to have the input, no doubt about it. I still think an SUP has a place. It may not be perfect, but it has a place. And it is, as I think Commissioner Cooper was saying, there's an expiration of it. There's a way that it can go away, but the others, they all run with the land, and you have to come back to get it changed. Granted, if you want to change the special use permit, you've got to do it too, but that's typically not the case. Usually it either goes away or it maintains itself, and you keep renewing the permit. So I agree, it is a process thing we need to talk about. If the city agrees that we want to go to conditional, I think there are some additional pieces that may need to go into it. Don't know what they are. I just know that I don't want them tied to a site plan, having to worry about major and minor modification. They're talking about a specific use when they're the way that it's used with a special use permit. So those are my 2 cents. I do agree public needs to have input. And I've been in the same meetings where somebody is really upset because they couldn't talk because of the standing thing. But it's, I think there's a way to do it. It's just a process thing. I'm not sure we're not 100% there yet. I just don't fully agree that it's a conditional zoning is the only way that can be done. So.
Anybody else? Okay, the proposal here is, we did close the public hearing. Yeah. Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Now we're in deliberation, which we've been doing for the last half hour. So now I guess I'll call to, do I have a recommendation?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to make the motion, but before I do have one quick comment.
Sure.
In my opinion, I do think this is the evolution of process. Just the SUP has been around for a long time, but just because it's there doesn't mean just because that's how we've always done it doesn't mean that's how it always has to be. Always will respect those that have the obligatory no vote. I've sent up some protest no votes myself from time to time, so don't expect everybody to agree. I said it last meeting, but I say it again. I don't see any adverse impacts to anyone involved in the process. I would consider, as Commissioner Collier has mentioned, when it goes in front of the city, to think a little bit further on it running with the land, you know, because I feel like that's a big delta between what it is today and what it might be if this is passed. I feel like it could have some type of expiration, but I think beyond that, I cannot see anybody damaged by this change. So with that, I would like to make a motion that we approve agenda item number 1, the request to Land Development Code Amendment to replace special use permits with conditional zoning. The Planning Commission finds this request is reasonable and consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington: the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. The Planning Commission considers its approval to be reasonable and in the public interest because the proposed amendment will replace special use permits with conditional zoning, allowing for legislative hearings to be held for the review and approval of unique land uses, and therefore the Planning Commission recommends approval of this request.
I have a motion made by Commissioner Kofer. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Commissioner Adams. All in favor, say aye. Yes.
Before we vote, just in terms of discussion, Commissioner Kofer, I agree with you that, you know, SUPs have, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but the first thing that popped into my mind was the same argument of doing away with it. One meeting brought us to tonight. And we're talking about fundamentally, and I totally disagree about the process part of it. We're fundamentally changing an applicant's ability to utilize the SUP in what I believe, respectfully to everybody involved, to be insufficient research. We're basically going to be the guinea pig, if I understood this correctly, in this process, both on the state statute issue and on who's going to be the first one to apply with this new. I mean, that's where the rubber's going to meet the road. In the presentation from staff, it says, by contrast, evidentiary hearings prohibit communication with City Council, require standing to be established for individuals wishing to speak, and allow only competent, material, and substantial evidence to be presented. Isn't that what you want? I mean, 200 people fill this room to object to something. There's 121,000 residents in the city of Wilmington. And if an applicant, we've also had attorneys representing opponents to projects speak on their behalf multiple times in my 4.5 years up here. So the argument that the development community's got to pay all the money for the experts and the public doesn't have to pay anything and can get up and say whatever they want, and that's not good government to me. So I'm going to vote against this because I think, you know, to my knowledge, there were no focus groups with land use people that go through these every day, with the community of people that actually utilize this. How many discussions were had with them? What were the impacts? What could be done to mitigate that? Commissioner Kofer even said, or excuse me, maybe Commissioner Collier said, you know, when this goes to council, I hope. I ain't gonna vote for nothing that I'm hoping the you know, they're gonna approve. I'm gonna vote to recommend what I feel comfortable with, and I don't feel comfortable with this.
And a follow-up to that, John, just, you know, I feel like hopefully if we're doing our job and we're send up a recommendation that's a 3-4 or tied, you know, that it has some merit, that it was challenged here and that we debated it and discussed it, but we weren't all in agreement, and that, you know, that the council will give it a lot more depth and perhaps, you know, that obligatory no will be helpful. So, but my motion stands.
And we have a second. So I think the best way to do this, so we're all clear, is I'd like to go go down one by one so I make sure I record it correctly. So Commissioner Kofer,
Aye.
Commissioner Collier,
Respectfully, no.
Commissioner Adams,
Yes.
the chair votes yes. Commissioner Lennon,
No.
Commissioner Woodruff, Commissioner Jones.
No.
That is, the recommendation passes 4-3, and this will move to city council, what date? Middle of June, probably.
It'll be June 3rd.
It will be June 3rd, okay. The only thing I would say in closing, because this has been last month and this month, I don't want anybody walking away from this thinking this is a simple thing, because it's not, all right? I mean, I'm looking at my peers, and there's, I guarantee you, there's nobody going to say this was simple discussion. The thing I do feel positive about is we'll all walk away from this table going, hey, good discussion, and let's move on. I would challenge the city staff, Meredith, to your team as an example, and Brian and Linda and Mike, as you prepare council. I mean, you've heard the discussion. So, as you present that on, the June meeting, that probably should be pieces of the discussion. I'm just thinking, you guys do with it whatever you want. But anyway, let's move on. We've, as my football coach said, we have cussed and discussed this thing, and we are moving on. So with that, we're going to move to agenda item number 2. Meredith, thank you for coming. Agenda item number 2, under new business. Conditional rezoning property containing 5.91 acres located at 202, 310, and 314 Covil Avenue from R15 moderate density single dwelling to MD17 high density multiple dwelling residential district for a residential development. Zach Smith is going to overview this for the commission.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. This is public hearing number 2. The site is located to the south of Market Street along Covil Avenue and west of Broad Street. The site contains approximately 5.44 acres and is currently vacant. This map shows the general vicinity surrounding the request, as well as the existing conditions of the subject property. These are photos of the existing conditions surrounding the subject property along Covil Avenue and Broad Street. These are photos of the adjacent properties and land uses. Residential uses are located to the north, south, east, and west of the site. The site is currently zoned R15, moderate density single dwelling district. The site is bordered to the north, south, and west by R15. The subject property is also bordered to the east by MD17 and MF-MH Legacy District. The applicant proposes to rezone the subject property to MD17 CD, high-density multiple dwelling conditional district for a 65-unit townhome development. The project consists of 65 two-bedroom units for a total of 130 bedrooms. Vehicular access will be provided to the site from 2 driveways located along Covil Avenue. The maximum density for MD17 is 17 units per acre. The applicant proposes a density of 11.9 units per acre. The minimum parking required would be 130 off-street parking spaces. The maximum parking allowed would be 179 off-street parking spaces. The site plan proposes 148 off-street parking spaces. The site is located within the boundaries of the U-4434 NCDOT project, known as the Independence Boulevard extension from Randall Parkway to Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. According to the draft State Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP, construction is no longer funded, and there is no timeline for right-of-way acquisition or construction. In front of you are conceptual elevations of the proposed development. The site is located in a designated suburban commercial retrofit area of opportunity on the growth strategies map. The site is also located within an urban mixed-use center on the growth strategies map. Transit-oriented and transit-ready development should be promoted around existing transit stations and stops. Growth should also be accommodated in the city through mixed-use neighborhoods with a variety of housing types and price points. Staff believes the proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the recommendations of the Create Comprehensive Plan and that the request is reasonable and in the public's interest. Staff recommends conditional approval. This concludes staff's presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and the applicant is here as well.
Commissioner Adams?
Zach, could you talk a little bit about, on page 37 of our packet, was a slightly different site plan that dealt with stormwater a little differently and maybe had an additional parcel? Can you just talk about some of the evolution of the site, between the two site plans versus the final one?
When we originally received the application, 110 Covil Avenue was part of the project, and they're no longer part of the project. So that's the change in the site plan.
Okay. Going down this side, anybody else? Okay, Zach, thank you, and let's hear from the applicant.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the commission. My name's Sam Frank. I represent the applicant. The applicant, technically on the application, is a land planner, excellent land planner. You know well, Cindy Wolf, who will handle our presentation this evening. Developer behind it is a group called Frying Pan Ventures, represented this evening by Andy Mitwall and Clayton Williams. Both of those gentlemen are here. Please don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions for us you think best answered by the applicant. This is an exceptional opportunity site. It's not underutilized, it's unutilized and has been for some time. It's located between higher density residential to the east, lower density residential to the west. A fantastic opportunity to be a transition residential site. I'm now going to ask Cindy to tell you more detail about the details of the design. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and again, for the record, my name's Cindy Wolf, and I've been working with these folks for several months on this project. Port South Village, of course, was constructed back in the 1980s. It was closed down in 2013. You can certainly see that there are 6 existing structures, but they have been totally abandoned and are in very poor condition. As Sam pointed out, we've got other multi-dwelling adjacent to us, the old multifamily, medium high, which is even over the 17 units an acre. This project that we're proposing, because of the housing product being townhomes, is just 12 units per acre. However, in our system, MD10 ends at 10 and MD17, obviously. So we're on the low end for what it's worth. The project does include 65 two-story single-family attached, or what we always refer to as townhomes. They will be constructed for individual ownership. We've oriented the parking down the center so that the units, most of the units actually face onto expanded open spaces. Others will have a small yard behind them. Public utilities are existing in Covil Avenue for water and sewer service. There are no capacity issues in the CFPUA system. Even though there is some existing coverage on this site with the drives and the building tops, the redevelopment will be required to provide stormwater management to all local and state regulations. The initial field survey identified the various regulated significant trees, which we've worked diligently to preserve within the layout. No specimen trees were identified, but always after the entitlement, we take advantage of a professional arborist and make sure that the trees we're trying to save in those essential site improvements can be saved, that they're of the species the field guys pointed out, and sometimes there's some errors, but we feel confident that what we've got is good information and that what we're trying to preserve will be successful. Other than the obvious point that this project's not in a mixed-use center, I believe the only other item of modest non-support in the consistency analysis referred to the setbacks of the buildings along Covil Avenue. Certainly the slight variation in the individual building setbacks I did because of the interest or the non-interest of just lining them up. I personally like the project that's at the corner of Carr Avenue and Randall Parkway, but I know one of the past council members absolutely hates that project because they're all lined up against the sidewalk. But anyway, for interest, that was certainly one of my items. The facades of those units do still present a clearly identifiable entry character, which is part of our frontage standards, and providing green space along the frontage, we believe, still promotes reinforcement of a vibrant public realm. And the other reason for doing that is that there are some rather mature trees from the project there that are along Covil Avenue. The placement of the frontage units not only provides the attractive green space outside their door, but I think it allows sufficient room for protecting the critical root zones of those trees that are behind the sidewalk. Of course, we also have the trees in the right-of-way. Those would be under the city's purview, but unless there's improvements here, there's no reason that those should go away either. The existing southern access into the site is dangerously offset from Broad Street intersection for cross-traffic turning movements. Sorry, I think. Anyway, so part of our alignment of our driveways, and I do need to just go back to here, is across from the driveway into Covil Gardens, and then the southern access being at Broad Street was really important for better visibility of traffic when they're at an intersection, and then safer vehicular circulation overall. Then, the placement of that southern access will affect a current bus stop on the Wave line. We're pretty sure that this is a fairly popular stop of the route because it does go from the main station out to the hospital. Certainly, you can get off on Wrightsville Avenue and have ways to go out to Wrightsville Beach or to downtown, even up on Shipyard. That takes you on different routes. So I think that line, the 106, is one of the important ones. The developers have committed to work with Wave to relocate that stop, probably still in the general vicinity, just below the Broad Street intersection, and improve it at their cost. With that, I'll just say that we appreciate the staff's positive recommendation for approval. We're certainly available for questions, and we hope you'll agree that it is consistent, reasonable, and in the public interest because it does provide infill development where services are available and which then reduces housing development costs. It restores housing options and diversity in our housing deficit situation. And location-efficient housing should be promoted and encouraged for sustainability and adaptability of our community. Thank you.
Okay, questions. I'm going to start this one. Questions for the applicant. Cindy, two questions. If you go back to the picture of the bus stop, you said it's going to be relocated and improved. What improved how? Are you going to bench covering what?
That's what we have discussed, is a shelter.
Okay. So when
Which
you say
on the more popular routes is always a positive aspect. With Broad Street, with Darlington right there, there's a lot of, I believe, users of the bus system in those communities that probably use this site. So the shelter is the primary aspect, with, of course, the trash can, the pole, and the bench.
between Randall and Market on that stretch of Covil,
Mm-hmm.
that can pick up a lot of speed through there very quickly. Excuse me. Any thought of any type of, the last thing I would suggest is a traffic light?
Is a turnoff.
Yeah.
And that is working with Wave to do that, yes.
Okay. Okay. Commissioner Adams.
I don't know how far any design was done on the Independence enlargement through here in terms of additional right-of-way, but was there any, if there was information available for that, did that have any bearing on your site planning relative to the buildings from Covil now?
There are a lot of moving parts with that. Certainly the relocation of the railroads. I think it's of the opinion that if Independence were to go all the way through, there's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts. So, not specifically.
Commissioner Woodruff? Commissioner Collier?
But following up on Commissioner Adams, having the buildings back, and I understand you're respecting the trees that are along there existing, but having them back in the event that Covil is widened into Independence, you certainly are not putting those buildings at risk to need to be torn down later because of purchase of right-of-way, correct?
Certainly, that would be feasible. And if I may, Commissioner Adams, back to the questions, obviously Zach wouldn't have really known. Just some moving parts as far as the Williams track, which is up in the northeast corner, being included in it. We were still working in negotiations and compiling the plans together, and they opted not to include that in this rezoning. As far as the sketch plan that was part of the community information meeting, and that's what you're referring to, I had shown a pond, it could have been an infiltration, open space behind the buildings that back up against the Mercer homes. So again, it was a sketch plan. It was certainly open to fine-tuning after the surveying came in with the trees and all of the other aspects of things.
I'm reading your notes from the community meeting. It says, the major topic of conversation was the long-standing vision for the extension of Independence Boulevard. We've talked about that here in a couple minutes. So anything else that local homeowners on Mercer or any other streets come up with, or was that
They
really
were just interested in what we thought, because all they've ever heard about is this extension, and it would have huge impacts from what it looked like. But they were all thrilled about the redevelopment of this particular site and and that it really didn't affect their community. Certainly over on Mercer, there will be a buffer yard along the back part of it, similar to the type B buffer yard between multi-dwelling and single family. It was a very positive meeting, and sometimes in these types of projects, you certainly don't get those.
Well, I'm just looking at the sign and just an observation. You got real people at this one.
Yeah, we had a lot of people, absolutely.
So,
But it was not contentious at all.
Good. Okay, Commissioner Kofer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Cindy, one thing that came up at the last meeting that intrigued me it was a North Carr case, and it's almost like the thinking of the future development down these corridors. And you, in your opening remarks, you mentioned the facades and the interest and frontage standards and things of that nature. So my understanding is during the process as an applicant, the requirements are one elevation for the internal section of the site and then a site plan. Is that those two ingredients?
The application currently has no mandate for elevations at all. It is usually accepted, and it does comment that in addition, staff may be interested in elevations and those sorts of things. Now, elevations certainly along those particular frontage roads that have been identified in the Land Development Code, and let the planners certainly correct me if I'm wrong. But no, in my experience, it has always been about the elevation facing the streetscapes. So we have not detailed the footprints or the layouts of these particular units. They're 18 by, I believe, 42, something like that, as far as the footprint itself, 2 stories. That takes a lot more work.
Right.
Now, we know that we have to address the streetscape with how did I describe it, an obvious entry point, so that it addresses the public and it doesn't look like the back of a unit, sort of similar to what has happened on Wrightsville Avenue recently.
That's the one I'm focused on. So I'm learning on the job here. Forgive me, but I'm using you as part of my education, because you've been at this a while. So just if you can just bring me up to speed. I guess, one, the requirement on the application is a site plan. 2, you take it a step further, you give an elevation. You're not required to do that or mandated to do that. But what we got into with the North Carr concern was, you and I have the same illustration in my mind, I think, as the Wrightsville Avenue. As you approach the old Cape Fear Hospital on the left, if we're heading west, we're looking at the rear of all these townhomes on what I would consider an arterial street, and it's like, it's not that sightly, it's kind of unsightly. So with your project, what we're seeing with this elevation, is that fronting Covil?
Yes.
Okay. But there's
Now-
no requirement for you to
Now, the other
provide
side may very
that.
well look very similar. I
Okay.
don't know how the architect will handle it, but we know that the side facing Covil has to have fenestration, have an entrance door, and sort of appeal like there's a porch and you can
Why
sit
do you
out
say it
and
has to? Why does it have to? Is that in
It
our
is-
code?
Yes, it is one of the multi-dwelling design standards.
So fronting the street, the frontage that you said earlier, that's a requirement. That's what I'm getting at. I'm just using this moment to learn a little more.
It very specifically says that the facades of those units must present a clearly identifiable entry character.
Okay, good. Well, it's good to know. Because at the last hearing, I was kind of requesting elevations of the north car, in that case, north car side, which, perhaps that's not necessary
Yeah,
if we
have
have
not
these.
given you the parking lot side elevations.
Okay, these are the front, Okay, great. That was my only concern, when you're driving down as a Wilmingtonian and you're looking at the rear of a property versus the front facade, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no one else, thank you.
very much.
At this point, we'll open the public hearing. And again, the rules of the road, very simply, 10 minutes pro, 10 minutes con. So I'll start with anyone wishing to speak in favor of this application. Again, anyone wishing to speak in favor? Seeing no one, anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Seeing no one, then I'm going to close the public hearing and ask for the wishes of the commission.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no further, discussion, I'll like to make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to move approval for agenda item number 2, the request for 202, 310, and 314 Covil Avenue to rezone from R15 to MD17 CD, multiple dwelling residential conditional district. This request is consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington, the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan, and the Planning Commission considers its approval to be reasonable and in the public interest, as the proposal provides housing near transit services along major corridors and near commercial services. Therefore, the Planning Commission recommends approval of this request.
I have a motion made by Commissioner Lennon. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Adams.
Here, may I ask one question, and I'll promise I'll hush.
Go right ahead.
There was a note in here about the crosswalk at Covil, I guess crossing Covil at Broad Street. Is that included in the conditions? I've been trying to flip through to find them, and I can't find it.
I'll have to look. That's a great question.
Whose is this one? I'm confused.
That is not within the conditions.
It's not within the conditions, okay.
However, that is something that we can hash out at the TRC level to look for any improvements that may be required with this development.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You okay with that?
Yes, I'm fine.
So again, I have a motion and I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Seeing no opposition, it passes 7-0. Congratulations. That closes the regular piece of our agenda. Let's go to other business. Items from the commission. And just real quick question for staff. We changed some dates, in April we approved them. Can we just reiterate those again? Because dates for, was it July and August or September, whatever those were?
Your July meeting, you approved the changes to the calendar, so the July meeting will be the week of this. It'll be on the 16th, the same week, the same week as the scheduled council meeting, and then the September meeting was moved to the second week of September, also with the same week as the council meeting, the first council meeting of that month.
What's that, like 9?
I believe it's the 9th.
September 9th, okay. Okay. Anybody else? Commissioner Jones, any?
Last editorial question of the night, or not question, but statement. We heard a lot about participation from the community tonight. How many times have you all heard people say publicly and on social media that they're going to get involved and start attending every planning commission and city council meeting? Or when their item is finished, they get up and walk out. So I'm all about public participation, but participate, like contribute. I mean, all of us are just average Joes up here and not getting paid, and we're participating. So I'll leave with that thought.
Commissioner Collier, or Cofer,
Sir.
sorry.
Brian, can you help me? So the last meeting with North Carr, this meeting with Covil, Cindy, it seems like some of the things she said may have contradicted what we talked about last meeting. I mean, is an elevation required or not?
They need to show compliance with their code or the ability to show compliance with the code. If they provide an elevation and provide certainty that they are complying, it will be enforced on the back end if that elevation is not provided for a specific frontage.
Okay.
It's in their best interest to give us an elevation because we generally want to see what it's going to look like facing the public right of way for the public realm. But that will be enforced in plan review regardless.
Okay. So, and anybody could jump in to help me here, because I just, so the elevation we're given is not internal to the site. It's always going to be the street facade.
I think we prefer to see all of them, obviously, but the most important as a planner and for something that's going to impact the city in the public realm is the one facing the frontage, facing the right of way.
Okay. Okay, good, because that was bothering me. Then it's funny she said the Wrightsville Avenue case or project. It's just in my mind. I'm like, gosh, why did we let that happen? You know,
You just can't shake it.
I
can you?
can't. But now that I know that's when we see an elevation. Period. It's not required, but if they do provide one, it's going to be the street frontage. But a site plan is required.
Site plan is required. They're required to meet the code requirements, and the elevation, like I said, is to their benefit to show folks what they're approving. We would rather see all of them, all the sides, but the one that's most critical is what's facing the public realm, because that's how the public interacts with that side of the structure.
Okay, this is probably 3 times in a row I've said I'm not going to ask again. I'm writing a cheat sheet down, I promise. I won't ask again.
Okay.
Mr. Crawford, you can ask me as many times as you like.
Commissioner Adams.
So it does have some leeway, but I think it is always in the best interest of applicants to submit things that convey scale and character of their projects in the vertical sense beyond a site plan, right? Like, I think that anything that they can do to educate us as our body and or staff, whoever is looking to approve this, because sometimes it's renderings, sometimes it's elevations. I think the intent of it is, again, to demonstrate scale and character in some way, shape, or form. And to me, that's okay that it is a little looser into how they can do that as a prescribed, you must do an elevation only of the right-of-way or these kind of things. So the generality is a little better, for me than the prescriptive nature of that. I don't know if that helps answer kind of your question.
It does, and especially from an architectural standpoint. I mean, I'm not trying to belabor the process or make it more expensive for someone to do it. It's just in the public interest, and some of the words you use were more eloquent than what I'll be able to conjure, but that street side just seems real critical, and as it keeps going, it seems even more critical to create the streetscape. So thank you all.
One more item. I would like for our group to, from a process standpoint, be mindful and diligent about when we ask questions versus when we're voting and making motions. And if that means making doubly sure that there aren't questions before we are already in motion to vote, that would be helpful. I just think there's a time and a place that's appropriate for discussion versus motions and voting and not.
Okay. Anything else from the commission? From staff?
Last evening approved the 48-unit senior affordable housing development at Carr and MLK. We also, on the greater downtown plan front, staff did a brief overview for the council just as kind of an introduction to the themes and the strategies, the broad strategies that have come out of that process. We had talked to you about having a special meeting. We are going to be having next steps. The council had a lot of questions for us on Monday morning that we're getting to the actions that we didn't present to them because it was a briefing and we only had a short time and we didn't have time to go through every action that was that we have as a recommendation. So stay tuned for more information. We're happy to send you the link to that presentation if you'd like to see it. Again, I just want to, it is brief and the strategies are broad. There are many actions that are recommended that are nested under each of those strategies, and those were not presented this week, again, due to time constraints and really just wanting to introduce this to the council as we move forward. But we anticipate, and we did recommend to them having a joint meeting with the Planning Commission, and so stay tuned for information on that as we move forward.
I heard last night that they had asked if we had been informed or whatever, and I had two of them call me today, and I just said no, but we're interested, so.
I think we had done a presentation. It may have been, I know Travis has been here before to speak on it. I don't know if with the timing of that, but I believe he had come in at one point to speak on the plan. So, but yeah, we will be having a joint meeting.
Just as an FYI, I ran into Rachel Schuler on the way out last night, and the conference call we're having next Tuesday or whenever it is with the plan. Yeah, I thought it kind of strange. It was only 30 minutes given with the topic, and that's all they. I don't know what we're going to accomplish in 30 minutes, but I just wanted to share.
Yeah, this is not something we're scheduling. It's something they're scheduling.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Having said that, I need a motion to adjourn. I have a motion. Do I have a second? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? We are adjourned.